Hello everybody and welcome to this Q3 update of the Interdobs BW Bridge Optimizer. My name is Ronald Konijnenburg and I'm responsible for innovations within Interdobs. So what is the topic of today? There are many BW customers still around and for very good reasons, because it's a very good product. However, there is a new product available from SAP called SAP DataSphere, and we see quite a tremendous, let's say, interest in the capabilities of DataSphere. If there is a new product, there's always, of course, a question: what should I do with my previous environment? In this case, a BW system. Quite often there has been heavy investments in BW. It has been a product which has been around since '98, which means that there has been about, in average 10, 15, sometimes even 20 years of developments in a BW system. On the other hand, we have DataSphere, which has some tremendous capabilities which are not available in BW. Like easy access to data, sharing data across different environments, within or outside of the company. Self-service modeling is a very big topic. So there is quite some functionality there which is actually needed for a digital company currently today. So the question arises: how do we move our current on-prem BW system into the cloud? And this is actually where BW Bridge comes in. The BW Bridge is sort of an extension to DataSphere, which you can use to convert or transfer, let's say, your existing BW platform partly into the cloud. And just to get ahead of things a bit, the BW Interdobs Bridge Optimizer gives more possibilities in order to give a clear understanding how to move from A to B. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So, like already mentioned, the BW Bridge, so basically you have a BW4 environment in the cloud, which is not license based but consumption based. So that in itself is a very interesting topic already for customers. Because if you're on a BW 7.5 system and you need to go to a new release, that new release will be BW4, which has a whole new license structure. So most of the times our clients are looking for something which could make the decision easier to move to a different platform. So in this case, the BW Bridge is consumption based, so you don't have to invest upfront, no out-of-pocket money. So it's a very interesting option if you have an existing BW on-prem system at a certain in a certain data environment, to move that. Next to that, the BW system has some very rich functionality, of course. It has been around for over 20 years, so there's a lot of business content, extractors, objects, you name it. And of course you can all leverage those into the BW Bridge. So that's very interesting, that next to all the new functionality you have in DataSphere, you can also leverage existing BW functionality. So that makes the combination extremely powerful. And of course there are ways to move from A to B. So to move the current, let's say, or your current BW system into the BW Bridge. So how does that go? So in principle, this is the status quo. A lot of BW 7.5 systems in the world, some are even older, and there has to be a way to move that into the cloud. So that is basically what can be done with the conversion tooling from SAP. The Interdobs Bridge Optimizer goes a step further. We don't have any additional conversion software, because that is already very good from SAP, but what we do offer is a lot of tooling in order to scan your current BW environment and to check out, okay, what is the actual usage. So if I have 10,000 objects in the system, maybe 9,000 of them I don't need, or often what we see is that 80 to 90% of all the objects and data which is in the BW system is pretty redundant. So you should not, of course, move that into the BW Bridge. because the BW bridge, like I already mentioned, is consumption based. So that basically means the more and the objects you migrate and the more data, the more expensive it gets. So a quick technical picture. Basically what happens on the water is that you have your BW system. So let's say it's a BW 7.5 system. Let's say that you still have a DSO instead of an advanced DSO. What the conversion tooling will do is you will click a button. You would say, okay, this DSO needs to be transferred on the fly into an advanced DSO into the BW bridge. There's another YouTube clip available on the Interdobs channel, which I will link in the comments of this post, so that you can also see, let's see how that works. In principle, you enter the object and it moves into the cloud into a new object. That new object in itself, so that's then in BW, an advanced DSO or a composite provider, can be leveraged in DataSphere. So you can actually go into DataSphere and say, okay, I want to have this consumption model, which is coming from BW, and I want to use that in my further modeling in DSP, in DataSphere. And the way that works is actually with remote tables. So what happens is that data store objects become remote tables, queries become business modeler objects, like perspectives, and you can actually use that. A lot of technical stuff I'm saying now, of course, but in principle the idea is that you move your on-prem objects into the cloud so that you can still make use of them in DataSphere. That is in a nutshell what it does. So the bridge conversion, so there are a couple of options. So currently today you could in principle move your BW 7.5 system into BW for HANA. Often it's not really done anymore, and that is partly due to the license impact it has, and partly due to the fact that even though BW 4 will be supported for many years, a lot of clients are actually looking at something else, which is a cloud-based solution, DataSphere. What we also see is that a lot of RISE customers have moved their ERPs, as for HANA, into the RISE program. So that means that these systems are moved to the cloud, but the BW systems are often still on-prem, because many of the RISE deals actually don't leverage the BW system or also take on the BW system on board. That has undoubtedly something to do with license and costs. So what happens is that the BW on-prem system needs to move as well. So often later on what we see is that clients ask us, okay, now move the BW system we have still on-prem into the cloud. So our recommendation is, and that is I think probably 9 out of 10 times, if a client does not want to move to BW 4, then the best option if you have a BW system running is to do the combination of the BW bridge with DataSphere. And then of course the question is always, what is the impact? What is it going to cost me to move from A to B? That's where the BW Bridge Optimizer scan comes into play. Some conversion paths. If you're on a very old system before 7.3, then you first have to move into 7.5 before you can move. There are very limited number of systems which are lower than 7.3 because that basically isn't supported anymore. So what is migrated? So this might look familiar because this tooling was also available already when moving to BW4 in the past from a BW 7.5 system, for instance. So DSOs go into ADSOs, info objects remain the same, transformations will remain the same. All source systems will have to be moved to ODP. Long story short, there is a lot of automated tooling available. Some of it is manual, and the most important one is actually the BEX analyzer tooling. So you could move queries and composite providers into the BW bridge and into DataSphere, because actually what would happen is that you would make consumption or perspectives out of them, consumption models. The query itself will not exist anymore in the BW bridge, so it will be transferred into a new object, and that of course can be then consumed in Analytics Cloud. So that is one of the conversion steps which need to happen, and also the our Interdobs BW Bridge Optimizer has a way of doing that. So we have best practices for that. So long story short, partly automatic, partly manual. A lot of tooling is already available, has been available for many years, because in effect it's leveraging a lot of the already existing BW conversion tooling, which was used when moving to BW 4. So what brings Interdobs to the table? So our value proposition is to simplify the migration to the cloud. So basically what we do is we do not want to migrate every single object you have in your BW environment into the cloud, but only the objects which are truly in use. And in order to do that, we have written our own custom programs which can do scans of your system, so that we can exactly pinpoint, okay, this is the objects which you need to convert, this is the data usage, this is the aging of the data, so how old is it, so what should you move. So that has a tremendous plus, let's say, because one, your data footprint and your object footprint in the cloud will be far less, so you would pay less money, let's say consumption based. And also, of course, a lot of the old redundant objects which you will never use, you don't take on board anymore. So that means you really migrate into a lean and mean system into the cloud. So that is basically on the business warehouse side. Now next to that, we also have a SAP Analytics Cloud Kickstarter, which means that we can also quickly implement Analytics Cloud for you as a customer. And that means that what we do is we basically have a ton of best practices which describe, for instance, how do you do authorization, how do you do teams in Analytics Cloud, what CSS, what styling do you use, what objects, how do you check performance, you name it, that's all part of the Kickstarter package. So we look at the BW part and we also look at the SAC part. So this is our own value proposition, this is our own tooling. So next to that, we of course also use the SAP tooling, and the SAP tooling is, for instance, the readiness check for the remote cloud conversion. So that's a program which you can run in a BW system, and that will say, okay, if you want to move into the bridge, this is the impact. So you would have to move your DSOs into advanced DSOs, or you would have to move some of your source systems into ODP. The cool part, of course, is that what we do with RScan is we actually tell you that some of these objects you should not have to look at. So if a DSO, for instance, is not used anymore, of course, we also do not have to check it in the readiness check. So that is the big advantage of using the Interdobs scan, is that we actually only scan and only check the objects which are really in use. So also the migration impact to move from A to B will be far and far less. So how does it all work? So basically we have a transaction called ZBridge, what's in a name, and ZBridge has a couple of options. So it's basically checking two parts. One is data usage or object usage, and also we look at all the transformations in the system and all the custom coding in order to figure out, okay, we know that, for instance, this composite provider needs to be converted. For instance, I don't know, the sales order cube or whatever, a composite provider. But what we can also check is that we can also list all the underlying objects. So for instance, in the BW system, if you do in a transformation a lookup into a different object, we also find that object in our scans, which is unique, that's what we can do. And we can do that in all different types of transformations. So direct transformations, ABAP based transformations, new AMDP based transformations, we can do it all. So what's a typical workflow for a customer? So let's say that we come in and you're asking us to do the scan. So we start off with scanning the usage of the system, and we do that based on info provider, or we do that based on queries. So for instance, we scan, okay, what's the usage of a certain query? We see that it has been ran for 80 times or 500 times, then it must be a very important query. Has it run this year? We also check that. And if so, we double click on the object, and then we list, let's say, all the underlying objects which need to be converted. So we know that when a object is often ran, then of course it's important to take a board and also convert into the bridge. So we scan the queries, we know what queries are in use, and we also know what underlying objects are in use. Composites, ADSO, cubes, DSOs, HANA views, you name it. Second step is that we actually check the data usage. So let's say that we found out that we have for a certain composite provider 10 different ADSOs which are attached to that composite provider. What we then do is we check actually what's in those ADSOs. So how many records, what's the last load. So if there's tremendously old data into the system, for instance well before 2018, or the last load was in 2017 or whatever, or it even had 0 records, then we would not take that on board anymore. So next to the fact that we know which objects are to be converted, we also check the data which is in there. And the assumption then of course is if there is no data or there's very old data, of course then we check with the business, but still often we don't have to convert that, which again limits the footprint we have in the cloud. Then we check the complexity of the objects. So is there ABAP in the transformations? Is there AMPP in the transformations? You name it. So we also check that to see if there are additional objects we need to migrate because these are part of the business logic. So that's what we all do in these type of scans. That's a typical workflow. So then we basically have a list of all the objects which need to be converted. So what we then do is we do a sizing based on these objects. So we put that in the BW Bridge sizing report, which is a standard SAP program, and that comes up with a quote for the basically how much storage or how much BW Bridge blocks you need. So that gives already an idea of the monthly cost. So the business case, let's say in terms of running costs, can already be made then, because we would know, okay, this is what you're currently paying today, and this is what you're going to pay in the future by using the BW Bridge. Next to that, we check all the objects with the BW with the readiness check. So we take the objects which need to be converted, which are in use, and we pull that through the readiness check, and then we know, okay, this is the complexity we have to move those objects. For instance, DSOs need to go to ADSOs, multi-providers need to go to composites, or maybe you're in luck and you're already on a lot of BW4 objects, then it's most of the times it's a simple exercise. And then at the end of the day, let's say that the business case is fully positive and you give us the go to do the migration. Then we use the output of the BW Bridge Optimizer scan and we use that to transfer the objects from A to B. And again, I will post a link to the other recording we have on the channel, which shows you how that looks. So let's do a small deep dive into the programs itself. So first off, I was talking about the query usage and data usage scan. So what we do there is we check in depth what is with these queries. So how many are in use, what are the underlying info providers, HANA providers used. So basically we really give a clear overview of all the objects, the last run date, has it been run this year, basically you name it. We can do the same for the info providers, and of course the system is smart enough that, for instance, if a certain info provider is not used in one query but it is used in a different query, then of course it's still listed as being that it has to be converted. That's also still part of the scan. And this is a small recording of what it actually does. I would also list again the other recording, which is also showing a lot of these demos. Then the data usage, that's the second part of the usage scan. So first was which info providers and queries in use, and then we actually check which data is in use. And we can use that also on certain objects. So we can say, okay, for instance, the customer is using 0 date as a date object or z date as a date object. We can use that. We can list that in this program and it will show us, okay, these are the time slices which are in your DSO or ADSO. So for instance, it will check, okay, if it finds fiscal year, for instance, 2017, it will list that. So what we can do then is list the number of records, when has been the last load, but also what is the age of the data. That's something we can do as well. And we can do that for one object, or we can do that for all objects in the system, and we can do that for every single time type object. Even if the date field is not a date field, we can still use it in order to scan, let's say, how old the data is. So the other conversion objects, so what happens with the transformation reads? So again, that's most of the times underwater in BW, so you would not be able to list those without going into every single transformation, and we build a program to do that, or multiple programs. So for instance, the direct transformation read would say, okay, these are the DSOs which are being read, and these are the ADSOs are being read directly. So these need to be taken on board, let's say, when migrating. Same goes for AMDP. We actually have a very smart program here which looks at the select statements in the transformation, figures out where the join is, and then mentions actually which objects which are part of the SQL statement in the AMDP should be transferred as well. So we have really a view, a complete overview of all the objects. And what we also have, and that's sort of a bonus, is what we can also do is we could actually list all the simple transformations. So let's say that we have a data source which dumps data directly into an ADSO one-to-one. We could list those, and what's the advantage? The advantage is that these could probably be moved back to the source. If there's no real business logic, if it's just, for instance, a list of items, which you could also easily run in S4, this program would list those so that you could not convert those, but run them in the source, for instance. So that's yeah, a simplification of the environment. And then of course we have transformations with ABAP, which we could also list. Routines, start routines, it will mention if it's an end routine, the object, the lookup object, you name it. We use everything in order to come up with with a conclusion of which objects need to be migrated. Then this is a normal, let's say, conversion sequence. So this is what we could do for you as a customer. So if you would call us and say, okay, we would like to have a scan done, that's what we could do. So we would use the Interdobs BW Bridge Optimizer tooling, which is called T2 and T3 in this screen, and we would use our tooling and the SAP tooling to come up with the impact to move from A to B. So we would say it's very complex or it's very simple, and this is the impact. Next to that, we would also tell you what it's going to cost, let's say, on the consumption side. So how much BW Bridge blocks do you need to purchase, subscribe to in order to move from A to B. And then if there is a positive business case, which quite often is the case with an on-prem system, then we would go into the realization phase and we would take the output of our tooling, we would validate that of course in a couple of workshops again with you as a client, come up with the scope, and then we move from A to B. And then you could go live with the BW Bridge. What we often do is actually we do a phased approach. So your BW on-prem system can still be around, and we would for instance first do the most important object, and then in the second run we do less important objects. So we don't do we can do a big bang, but what often is chosen is to do a phased approach. Smaller chunks and not let's say a big chunk. These are some customer references, so we've done quite a number of scans already. You can read them on the screen here. We're very happy that our customers are very positive about this scan. It brings them value, and that's the most important thing for us. Right, that brings us to the end. Thank you very much for your attention and time. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to contact me via whatever channel, Twitter, LinkedIn, mail me, and I will get back to you. Thank you very much.